There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers. A dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends. A place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view. But when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Good evening and welcome to another installment of the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, and this evening I have a special guest host with us. He's from the TV show Ghost Hunters. He's a TAPS member. You know him as Steve Gonsalves. He'll be with us in a few minutes here. He'll be co-hosting the show with me as we talk to one of his mentors in the field. In a sense, he grew up reading Loyd's books and learning all about Loyd Auerbach. Give you a little bit of background. Loyd Auerbach is our official guest for this evening. He's one of the world's leading experts on ghost and psychic experience. He has a master's degree in parapsychology. He's the director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, a professor at JFK University. He's a creator and instructor of the certificate program in parapsychological studies at HCH Institute and a member of the Ryan Research Center Advisory Board. He's the author of 7 books on the paranormal, and the most recent is a paranormal casebook, Ghost Hunting in the New Millennium. Good evening, Mr. Auerbach. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate you coming on the show with us this evening, talking to us about the paranormal and about investigations. I know that you've had a lot of experience with different types of investigations, and I'm sure all types of different spirits and things that you've come across. I would just like to start off the show real quickly. We have on the line with us a young lady here in Minnesota, a friend of mine who's related a story to me a few times. It's just kind of a strange story, and she's always kind of wondered what it was that she came across that night, and I thought it might be nice if you could hear her story, maybe give her your advice on what she might have come across, and if that's normal or something that you've heard of before. Jennifer, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Loyd, can you hear her okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll shut up, let you two go ahead and talk. Go ahead, Jennifer, and tell us your story.
Okay, great. Hi, Mr. Auerbach. I guess I'm not completely sure how detailed I should get, but I'll tell you the story, and then if you have any questions, I can answer them for you. This happened about 10 years ago, and my fiance at the time and I were on the way, or we're on a drive to meet a bunch of people out in a cabin in Wisconsin. So it was out a ways from town here for us, and we were driving along kind of I would say the back roads. So we're in amongst a lot of trees, but it was a late evening, probably 5 or 6 o'clock, and we were just kind of trucking along, listening to tunes, and, had not a care in the world. We're just kind of anxious to meet everybody else at the cabin. And we are driving along this road, and up ahead of us, it was probably around dusk, we saw a car, and we're guessing it was a late 70s car, kind of like a Ford LTD, like a navy blue or a black, and it was up on a hill a little ways. We just happened to notice it, and didn't pay much attention, just kept driving. And it slowly started coming down the hill towards the road that we were on, and it slowly came down and it stopped. And so basically it couldn't go straight. It was at a T. If it went straight, it'd go into a lake, and it just sat there. And we were driving and just kind of watched it because we didn't know what was going to happen. And the closer we got to it, all of a sudden it was like the person who was driving the car, they took their foot off the brake, and the car slowly started coming out into the intersection, making a left-hand turn, which would come past us. So we were braking faster and faster and harder, and as the car slowly turned in front of us, and we were almost at a stop at this point, we were looking in the driver's seat, and the person or whatever it was that was driving the car was following us. It was watching us, but it was like a faceless person. Its forehead was a little bit more protruded. It had like no eyes. There was a little bit of a shape of a nose, and kind of like a bigger chin, but there was definitely no face, but it seemed to be watching us as it slowly turned and then ended up kind of going along its way. We kind of drove for probably about another mile before I kind of said, "What was that?" And we kind of shrugged it off and thought it was really strange. Got to the cabin that evening and told other people about it, and everyone was kind of weirded out about it. Later, we left with another couple and went to a bar. And on our way home, ended up getting in a car accident. We slid through a T in the road, and I broke my arm in 2 places. And never talked about it again until the next year, where we brought it up at the campfire at the same cabin, where everything was okay then, and just kind of thought about how eerie it was and how we thought, was that some sort of a sign or what was it? And so even talking about it now, it's a little eerie. So what's your interpretation, or do you have any questions for me to...
Well, you both described the same thing. Both saw and described the same thing to each other?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a situation like this, given the time difference, it's very difficult after this many years to even understand exactly what might have gone on. But I will tell you that falls into the category, most likely, there's 2 possibilities here. Most likely it has to do with place memory, which is what we call hauntings very often. Locations, whether it's a house or a piece of property, a road, sometimes record snippets of their past. It could just be something horrendous that happens, something positive that happens, or just something very neutral. People often hear place memory, for example, of people rattling pots and pans in their house.
Uh-huh.
And you may have just simply gotten to a piece of that history of place memory, or car driving and making a turn. It's likely that the reason you didn't see a fully formed face is because the image itself didn't have all the information in it. This is not uncommon in place memory, where people pick up parts of it. The only other possibility is that you were both aware that you're going to have, unconsciously aware you're going to have an accident, and either your mind or his mind conjured up this little bit of premonition that you both share to give you a message, a metaphor that didn't quite work, because obviously got in the accident anyway.
Yeah.
But that's about the only 2 possibilities that I see from our perspective in parapsychology right now.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, we always, I always wondered about it, and it was kind of one of those stories that you tell other people, and we'd all get kind of freaked out, like it was some sort of an omen or a sign trying to tell us to perhaps slow down, and that we just didn't get it.
Yeah, that could have been. That very well could have been. And it would have come through or from one of the unconscious mind of one of the 2 of you. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of experiences are often shared by people.
Oh, wow.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your story this evening, Jennifer.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. All right. Now on the line with us, Mr. Auerbach, we've got Steve Gonsalves from the TV show Ghost Hunters. He's a fan of yours. When he found out I was going to have you on the show, he wanted to be a part of it with us. He enjoyed reading about you, reading the things that you've written, and said that he kind of looked up at you as kind of a mentor in getting into the field of the paranormal. So, Steve, this is Loyd Auerbach. Mr. Auerbach, Steve.
Hi, Loyd. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for asking. Dave, good to hear you again. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us. Now, we've got some questions for you, Mr. Auerbach. First of all, you've got a brand new book out there called A Paranormal Casebook.
Yeah.
And it's for ghost hunting in the new millennium.
That's the subtitle, yeah.
Right. Do you feel there's a lot of new changes coming into the field?
No, actually, there aren't that many new changes. I think the subtitle was something my publisher wanted.
Okay.
A lot of times, talk to authors across the board, you'll find that a lot of times we have very little control over what our book titles are. But the idea was to talk about kind of bringing some of my cases up to the new millennium, because I did, it's the most comprehensive write-up of one of my cases, the Moss Beach Distillery, plus a little bit on the USS Hornet. So some of the cases are actually very, very recent, and that's the idea. This is a case book of some of my more favorite cases. Not all of my favorite cases, because a couple of them were published in other books of mine, but it has some really kind of fun, good stuff. And I think it has an illustration of the way we do investigations in a couple different places in there, too.
Fair enough. Now, Steve, I know that you were interested in finding out, and I know we've had listeners writing in about this. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the paranormal investigation world? What got you involved in this, and why you decided to dedicate the better part of your life to doing this?
Well, when I was a kid, I became very interested in psychic phenomena in general, and I was had a lot of different interests as a kid. One was science. Actually, was an amateur rock collector and rock hound, and was interested in astronomy. And I also was interested in folklore. So, from the perspective of everything from fantasy and science fiction and comic books to mythology and folklore, I just got very interested in psychic phenomena thanks to Dark Shadows in the 60s.
Oh, sure.
And that led me to read books on parapsychology by J.B. Ryan and some of the other luminaries in the field. And since that was the one field that combined looking at psychic experience across the boards and science, it made a lot of sense for me, and it was something I just became very interested in as a teenager. A lot of TV programs back then also kind of helped cement that interest as it happens. And I was very fortunate to have a couple of high school teachers. One was the earth science teacher, the other was my physics teacher, who were also both interested in psychic phenomena. It's kind of unusual to find two hard science teachers like that. And I also got to meet a couple of parapsychologists in the New York area, since one of my neighbors was the yoga teacher for Montague Ullman, who was a very famous parapsychologist at the time. And it just seemed like, as I got more and more interested, both laboratory research and the field investigation were both kind of an equal weight for me. But when I got into graduate school in parapsychology, it became very clear to me that I was less interested in the numbers game of scientific, statistical, laboratory research, and more interested in people's experiences, partly because of my anthropology background in college, and partly because I liked talking to people, as opposed to running the numbers, more or less, in laboratory research. There's a very valuable place for lab research in parapsychology. It's the backbone of our field. But when it comes down to it, people have experiences that are drastically different than what they do in the laboratory, which would include, of course, apparitions and hauntings and poltergeists.
Okay. How old were you when you first did your first investigation?
Technically, the first investigation I did was in 1979, so I was 23 years old at the time. I was actually my first week in maybe second week in graduate school. One of the first courses I took at JFK in the parapsychology program we had back then was in field investigation, and as it happens, we got a lot of cases and just went right out on them, under supervision, of course.
Okay. Now, Steve, you had a couple questions for him, too. I'll be quiet and let you go ahead and ask a couple of your questions.
Hey, Loyd, I obviously looked up to you when I was younger and still do, and of course, William G. Roll and a few others. Did you have any guys that you sort of looked up to, maybe the previous generation of investigators?
Well, I read a lot. As it happens, I read a lot by Hans Holzer in the 60s and early 70s, and I got to meet Holzer when I was a teenager. One of my uncles worked at a radio station in New York City, and Holzer had been on the shows quite a bit. So I got to visit him, although I really don't agree with a lot of his interpretation of these cases. It was somebody I did look up to. I also looked up to some of the older generation, old generation, Harry Price, and some of the original psychical researchers that I'd read about. Right. But it was actually after graduate school. I met a lot of folks. I met Bill Roll in graduate school. Scott Rogo was somebody I looked up to very heavily. I got to know Scott very well before he died. And then when I worked, my first job out of graduate school was working for the American Society for Psychical Research and working with Carlos Osis, who was almost like the Van Helsing of parapsychology.
Right.
Could you tell us real quickly, there's some of us that are relatively new to the parapsychology world, just learning some of these names as well, and William G. Roll comes up a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about William G. Roll and what his role and influence on the parapsychology world for you was?
Sure. Well, Bill Roll is, I think, in some respects, the not necessarily the granddaddy, but more or less the father of our modern view of poltergeist phenomena. The granddaddy would be, amongst other folks, a man named Nandor Fodor, and there were a couple other researchers who kind of helped formulate this model. But Roll's book, The Poltergeist, which came out in the 60s, is the seminal work that really describes and nails down looking at poltergeist phenomena as an event caused by living people. And that's very clearly what the majority of these cases are, where things are flying around and breaking. They tend to relate to a living person who is undergoing stress and their unconscious mind using psychokinesis or mind over matter to be able to actually move these things. They're very different than the apparition or ghost cases where things move, because they tend to be more destructive, and that makes sense because they're like temper tantrums. People are letting off steam.
Now, with poltergeist activity, though, you know, when they've seen the stacking of chairs, you walk into the kitchen and all the chairs are stacked up on the kitchen table in some crazy way. How is that my angst-ridden teenage daughter doing that? I mean, how is she able to balance all these chairs just because she's, pissed at the world? I mean, how is that happening?
Well,
I can understand a glass breaking or TV's acting wiggy, but when you see things like that...
Well, there are poltergeist cases on record with furniture literally turning over, couches turning over, and real big things. We actually don't know the mechanism behind psychokinesis, but the thing to know is that when things move and there's a mind directing them, whether it's a living mind or a deceased entity, it is still psychokinesis. It's the same ability, living or dead. And we do have laboratory studies that show that people can do things, although you can't really study big stuff in the lab because the big stuff seems to relate to really unconscious energy, unconscious limits. Living people and dead people, I'm assuming, have the same perspective on what's possible, although the folks who seem to be apparitional have more of an open mind, you might say. And it's very clear from the research in psychokinesis, both in the laboratory and outside, that we set limits on ourselves. I mean, this is very evident in sports psychology also. We set limits on ourselves. And if something is impossible, we can't do it. But the unconscious mind doesn't have those limitations. So a teenager's unconscious mind stacking chairs, more likely knocking them over than stacking them, but that sort of thing is not outside the realm of possibility for the unconscious. Well, it's almost amazingly impossible for the conscious mind.
All right. Now go ahead, Steve. I know you had a couple more questions.
Yeah. Also, Loyd, how come you don't write with Fate magazine anymore?
I think you should talk to Fate about that. They canceled all the columns at the same time.
That was on their end? Yeah.
Yeah, there were a whole bunch of us who were columnists for years, and Fate just decided to go a different direction and cancel all the columnists all at the same time. We were all ended at the end of December 2004. So on a regular basis, I no longer write for Fate. I haven't really had the interest lately to write for Fate, just partly because I've been busy writing other things.
Yeah, sure. And a question about your new book. I know that like the first book that I ever purposely read cover to cover was ESP, your book, ESP and the Poltergeist book. How much does a new book differ from that? Is it just your case study? You're doing a little more in the new book?
Well, the new book is absolutely just a case study, and I shouldn't say just a case study. There's actually one of the stories from my original book, which is out of print, is in there. One of my first case, the one I mentioned that I started out on, that is in the new book as well as in the original book from 1986. Right. But the new book really details a lot of the cases I've done over the years, including a few cases that have nothing to do with the paranormal, have, well, not necessarily normal explanations, but unusual explanations that fall within normal range. And I do have in the book kind of an self-interview at the beginning and the end about what the phenomena is, what we think it is in parapsychology, and then how I got into the field and some of the other things I've observed, as well as just kind of basic tips on ghost hunting that are there.
Right. Awesome. One other question I had was, you have a program that you do at the HCH Institute.
Right.
And I have a lot of people asking me how they can get educated in the field and learn from the pros. And if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I would love to be able to point people in that direction.
Oh, sure. One of the things that I've seen is clearly missing from most of the amateur ghost hunting conferences and even some of the trainings that are out there is any information on parapsychology. It's almost as if ghost hunting has become its own field when it's separate from psychic experience, it's separate from the field of parapsychology, which has been doing this work for over 100 years. And you can't really consider or look at ghosts and poltergeists and things like that without considering other psychic experience. And you really have to kind of look into this work. So we started this program at HCH locally. HCH is, by its trade, a hypnotherapy training center. They have been doing certification in hypnotherapy for a number of years. And a friend of mine actually runs the school. And we just tried doing a couple parapsychology classes and decided to start this initial program. It's a very basic program, and we're hoping to expand it out as we get more interest. We audio recorded all the classes I taught last year, and so the way the distance learning program works, rather than being an online, just reading it thing, it's literally live recordings of the classes and a Q&A with the students. And then as people take the distance learning, I also do teleclasses as part of this so that they have a chance to talk to me and even other students to discuss questions that pop up and issues that pop up after listening to each of the classes. And people can find out about it either by starting out at my website, mindreader.com, or going to hypnotherapytraining.com and clicking on the parapsychology program link there. So there are individual classes people can take. People can also just buy the CDs without the certification, without the credit, you might say. So we've kind of given people a lot of different opportunities, different ways to learn if they depending on how they want to go about it. And the certification, by the way, is the state of California. So it's
awesome. Now, JFK still has their program, correct?
No, JFK has not had a parapsychology program since the late 80s.
Since the 80s, that's right.
I still teach some other courses there, here and there, but the fact is that for a number of political reasons within the university and financial ones especially, the program just didn't end up continuing past the late 1980s.
Gotcha.
Well, you're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town radio show. Gentlemen, if we could take a quick break here. We're going to come back. Our guest this evening is Loyd Auerbach. Loyd is one of the leading experts on ghosts and psychic experience. My co-host and special co-host for the evening is Steve Gonsalves from the TV show Ghost Hunters. Please stay tuned with us because we've got some great questions coming up from listeners, also from Steve and myself, and we're going to cover more. If you have more information you'd like about Mr. Auerbach and the work that he does, you can check out his website, as he mentioned, at www.mindreader.com. There'll be more right after this.
It will keep you on the edge of your seat.
I must have drank me about 15 Dr. Peppers.
I gotta pay.
Just don't get any on the floor. Hurry back. There is more to come from the Darkness on the Edge of Town.
If you read Taps Paramag every month, you'll be able to tell the difference between the absurd
Could not go to work because Bigfoot stole my car.
and the creepy. Taps Paramag takes you where few would ever go on purpose. From exclusive interviews with the cast of The Ghost Hunters to the latest trends in technology in the field of the paranormal. To join our journey, order at tapsparamag.com.
When Dave was a young boy, he once awoke to find himself staring directly into the eyes of a shadow person. Turns out it was just his life-size cardboard cutout of Donny Osmond.
Go away, little girl. Go away, little girl.
Welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town.
This is Dave Schrader, your host. Along with me, my special co-host for the evening, Steve Gonsalves from the TV show Ghost Hunters. Also, our guest for the evening is Loyd Auerbach. He's one of the leading experts on ghosts and psychic experience. He's the author of over 7 books, and his brand new book is called A Paranormal Casebook. It's Ghost Hauntings in the New Millennium, written by Loyd Auerbach. You can reach more information about Mr. Auerbach by going to www.mindreader.com. We will put a link up for that on our website as well. You can also check out his book through just about any bookseller out there. Is that right? Amazon, Barnes & Noble?
Right.
Okay.
Yep. That's, just about everybody should have that. And my other books, 2 books came out a year before.
Can you give us a little background right now, Mr. Auerbach, with ghost hunting being as popular as it is right now? You've got so many TV shows out there, like Ghost Hunters, Most Haunted, Dead Famous. Gosh, there's just seems to be a plethora happening all the time. And I know that people are starting to get involved in ghost hunting. What would you like to see for people that are getting involved in this? What do you think is more important for them to get started, and what kind of things and steps should they take for becoming a paranormal investigator?
Well, I think, first of all, they need to consider that the most important thing in any case is the human experience, because we define apparitions, hauntings, poltergeists, all these things by the human experience. In other words, without witnesses, you're just going into a spooky old house and there's nothing to really deal with. From the perspective of investigating something, you need something to actually investigate. And that means talking to people. Just like having a cold crime scene, we don't really have physical evidence here, so we have to go with people, the witness testimony that we actually have. So it's very important that people consider that. And the other is not to put so much reliance on technology. There is no technology that's been designed to detect ghosts or poltergeists or anything like that, because we don't know what we're trying to detect. We're running around with devices, admittedly, that are environmental sensors, and what we're trying to do is determine whether or not there are any anomalies or unusual elements in the environment at the same time, preferably, that a human is having an experience. And that's a key factor there. You really need to connect it to the human experience. Otherwise, you just have a high reading in magnetic field, or you just have a weird thing on your picture. And there's just way too much emphasis being placed on getting snapshots of orbs and all sorts of fun EVPs, and it's like bird watching to me. These folks are actually running around trying to catch the sight of a bird, and it's exciting when you get one, but you don't know anything about the migration patterns of the bird, why the bird is actually there, or what's actually happening. So people need to start asking more questions and really look at also normal explanations, because that's just a big missing piece in all of this.
Do you think that's important then to coming up with a steady set of questions that you go over with the owner of the property, the people that have been involved? Do you have a standard set of questions? And if so, is there one of your books or a site that you would recommend to go and get these questions from so people always follow the same methodology?
Well, I do have a list of questions on my website that people can download in PDF. It's a very extensive list of questions that actually was in my first book, in ESP Hauntings and Poltergeist. I put it up there for people to pull down. The thing is that while there are some certain basic questions you can get, this is kind of like a role-playing game where as soon as a question is answered differently, you have to go off on a different track. Because depending on what the phenomena is and what people are talking about, you have to be able to actually listen to people and to think on your feet and ask different questions. So one of the things I actually suggest to people is just picking up books about how to do an interview. There are great books for writers on how to interview people, which includes basic interviewing skills. If you don't want to go through any other way, that's a really good way to kind of get those skills down, because you really want to ask a lot of questions. You also want to look around always for even the most absurd normal explanation, because we can't study this stuff unless we eliminate the normal first. We have to get rid of all the possibilities. And in my experience and that of many of my colleagues, even in the most paranormal of circumstances, you have some single events or multiple events that are not paranormal. People, when they're afraid or ill at ease, will often make mistakes and group in things that they have perceived as paranormal that actually are not, because everything all of a sudden is weird and ghostly.
Okay, that's fair enough. Now, I know that you believe that involving psychics in an investigation should be a more accepted form. Is that correct?
Well, most of us in the field have used sensitives or psychics in some way, shape, or form. There are a couple of issues here, one of which is that if you've got witnesses who have had a number of experiences and continue to have experiences with the phenomena, a psychic really isn't necessary as long as you can work with the witnesses to, for example, try to communicate with the ghost if there is a ghost there. So I would almost always prefer to work with the witnesses if they have that kind of communication process or are willing to try it. That's a big piece right there. Psychics can be almost a magic bullet in a different sense, though, and that is when people are in distress. And this is the problem that I'm very honestly, and I'm hearing about a couple of cases from some of my colleagues where amateur ghost hunters have completely screwed up with people who need help. Many people out there have these experiences and they need help, and the one thing that too many amateurs don't have is any training in people skills, counseling skills, or anything else. So they may walk in and say, yeah, you have a ghost, but then they'll leave the people high and dry, or they'll run screaming from the house because of something they shouldn't have been afraid of to begin with. So psychics are very good at working with people on many different levels. It's just you have to really determine whether the psychic is somebody you can work with. And that's something that I and a number of our colleagues have kind of figured out over the years. And the most important thing to me about a psychic, besides their ability, is the ability to be questioned. So the people I work with, I can say, are you sure about that? And they won't feel offended. They know the difference between place memory or hauntings and apparitions. They know how to look for normal explanations. And those qualities are really important in working with a psychic. Ego is not a good thing. And that's the biggest problem with working with self-professed psychics, I think.
Is their ego?
It's their ego, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of, some people consider themselves superstars, and
right.
The ego comes along with it. And you need people who have a good sense of humor, especially about themselves. I only work with psychics who laugh at themselves, who have a good sense of humor about themselves.
Okay.
And who are willing to be questioned and are willing to be wrong, because that's a really important thing. Nobody's right 100% of the time. And there are way too many folks out there who are not in that class, I think. I'd actually rather work with somebody who doesn't have a lot of psychic ability but has some and has all those other qualities than somebody who's really, really psychic but difficult to work with.
When you're involving a psychic, and I know that, and people right now are really involved in the paranormal or finding more of an interest because of shows like Ghost Hunters, because they're able to watch. It's kind of, that fly on the wall thing where you can watch an investigation take place. I've watched shows like The Most Haunted, and Derek Akora, the psychic that they use on that show, something I've seen that occurs a lot on their show that doesn't happen on shows like Taps or Ghost Hunters. And I was wondering if you would attribute this to having a psychic with. There have been times when you can watch Ghost Hunters and you can see that something may happen to Steve. Well, then that kind of sets Brian off. There was the one episode when Jason and Grant were going into a room, and Jason, kind of the tough stoic guy, walked in first, and a bat dove at him, and when he kind of freaked out and jumped back, that automatically set Grant off into kind of freaked out mode.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that hysteria, you watch these people and nobody else is sensing anything in the room, and all of a sudden you've got a psychic like Derek Acora, and this is no slight against him, I don't know the man personally, but he'll suddenly start to sense this, and all of a sudden everybody starts acting weird, and they're edgy and kind of flipped out. Do you think that that's where you...
I think you need to be careful on who you work with, and I think you need to pick people who are very calm under pressure, psychics or otherwise. I mean, there's nothing wrong with jumping back when a bat comes at you. If it's a ghost, you shouldn't be jumping, because we've learned that nothing in the paranormal really can hurt people. But living things can hurt people, especially people.
Right. Well, I wasn't picking on him for that, but it was more along the lines of...
I'm saying that, right. Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, the hysteria...
The minute he sees Jason jump, Grant's comment was, I got nervous because if it was enough to freak Jason out, whatever was in that room, I automatically got freaked out. So
well, and sometimes you should be freaked out because a bat coming at you, or maybe with a rat or something like that, and it could be something you should be freaked out about.
Maybe even a spider, right, Steve?
Hey, having been bitten by a spider, I got to tell you, that's one of the few things I worry about. I go on these cases. But yeah, having a psychic who's a little hysterical or who causes other people to react in a hysterical way, that's a bad thing. You want someone who is actually calming, who is a calming influence, who feels strong and steadfast. I can guarantee you would not see John Edward react in that way. No matter what you think of him, he's not the kind of guy who, in a circumstance like that, would react that way. There are other psychics I've seen who would absolutely run screaming from a building at the slightest sign of anything paranormal, possibly because they haven't really experienced anything like that before. But then there are the people that I've met, some of whom I work with, some of whom I don't, who just basically kind of, I don't want to say they laugh in the face of danger, but they're not even feeling like they're in danger in these circumstances. To them, this is an encounter that is exciting, it's something to be curious about, it's something that hits their sense of wonder more than it hits anything else.
Now,
and that's the kind of person you want to work with.
Steve and I have had the conversation in the past. We've talked about psychics, and I know Steve feels pretty strongly, and Steve, I'll kind of let you cover this, but a lot of times it's the psychics and mediums that are the people that you feel are kind of making the field have a bad name.
Well, honestly, I got to say, with everything that's out there right now, they are not the people I worry about. There are not enough psychics and mediums who give a bad name to psychics, I'll tell you that. But it's what I'm hearing from the public and what I'm hearing from some of the media folks is it's the amateur ghost hunters who are making a problem, and certainly causing a problem for the parapsychologists out there. It's rare for psychics to call themselves parapsychologists. It's not rare, apparently, for amateur ghost hunters to get diploma mill degrees and call themselves doctors of parapsychology. We've seen that on the web. We've seen it in a few other places. They're causing more of a problem. But psychics can cause problems for other psychics. There's no question about that. There's a couple of fairly well-known psychics who I would not consider any more psychic than a rock, who don't display a lot of...
We don't talk about Sylvia Brown on this show like that, Mr.
My professional opinion. But, and you want people who have a sense of compassion. Some people don't have that. I won't say it. You will.
Right. I don't know what you're referring to. Sylvia Brown's a lovely woman.
Anyway, I'll let you get sued. I'm not going to worry about that.
Yes, that's fine. Hey, I'm siding with her. I'm okay with it.
Okay.
We got nothing. Bring it on.
Yeah. Now, but you do feel, when you have these... Now, Steve, I know on your show you've had people that do the dowsing rods and the psychic feel, and you guys always seem to catch the most flack when you have those kind of people on your show as well.
Well, you got to watch out for the flakes. There are a lot of those out there, so...
Yeah, one thing that Loyd said is you just got to, choose the appropriate people to work with, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Your comment about most haunted, just because that particular psychic chooses to act that way doesn't mean they're all going to act that way. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily have anything against psychics. I think they should be coupled with scientific technology whenever possible, just to validate their claims. But I've worked with 20 or 30 psychics in the past 10 years and have yet to have one tell me or show me anything of legitimacy.
Yeah, see, and I'm exactly the opposite. I do believe that having both, in fact, most of the psychics I work with know that, to me, in many respects, they are just simply another piece of detection equipment.
Yep.
That's a way of dealing with their ego, by the way. So when I get some unusual readings on any of the equipment I get at the same time that a psychic is perceiving something, that's golden to me. especially if everything is happening at the same time, including the psychic. We had a case in Florida with a Japanese psychic named Aiko Gipo, who died in 2004. She was communicating with a little girl's ghost, and we had a lot of equipment rented for us by a Japanese TV crew with us. And not only was she coming up with vertical information, but at the time that she was having this communication, we had an enormous number of things happening. Every piece of equipment we had was all going off strongly, with everything coming from right below her hand, which is where she said the ghost was.
All right, well, let me be devil's advocate here then. We just talked about poltergeist activity and not sure how to set off the psychokinesis. If this woman has some psychic ability, or believes she does strongly enough, and if she's focused that much, couldn't she be disturbing your equipment?
You have just hit the nail on the head. We have a real problem here is that, and when anyone goes out with any equipment, and I'm not talking about psychics, anyone, including the guys on Ghost Hunters, myself for that matter, and we have an expectation that something is going to be happening, we could be the ones causing the readings. We could be the ones affecting the film or the digital cameras. It may not be anything ghostly whatsoever. The expectation of everybody to get orbs may be causing the orbs themselves. So it's a real problem. We have this problem in parapsychological research. But what you try to do is have multiple witnesses. You're going into a situation that has a history of recent experiences, hopefully with the witnesses there, and whatever happens, hopefully you can connect to those experiences. And we just have to go with kind of gut instinct that it's not me that's causing this, it's whatever's out there.
Well, sure, I can see that part of it, but I would think that if you've got a group of people standing in a room and the self-proclaimed psychic of the group is explaining what's happening, it's like, me saying white elephant. Now, whatever you do, gentlemen, don't think about a white elephant.
Right.
You have to think about it. They're talking about this little girl ghost that's in the room. Everybody's kind of focusing it and putting their interpretation on it. Couldn't just that, we're all supposed to be this energy-based creature. That's got to be a huge... does that make sense? Am I
Oh, no, you're making very good sense, actually.
We could be affecting the total outcome of it.
We could be completely affecting all the technology. That's another problem with using technology. But then again, do you rely on the experience of one person? Well, in this particular case, the little girl's ghost that she described was one that had been seen and experienced by the family that had been living there for quite a while. So at least we had that kind of corroboration.
Okay.
And you look for as much as you can with the human experience, because at least with that, even though people can be fooled and even suggested to, we have to look across the boards at the number of experiences that people have and how many people have had those experiences, and preferably who's having it at the same time.
Now, do you believe it's a good idea to maybe keep your psychic in the closet about these things when you're going to go do an investigation?
This is where you have to start figuring out who the psychic is and how they work best. For example, Annette Martin is a psychic I work with quite often, and Annette does, she's actually been on Court TV and Psychic Detectives. She's actually been working with a variety of police agencies for real. It's verified. I know some of those cops over the last 25 years. And Annette is one of those people that, in a murder investigation, for example, she doesn't want to be kept in the dark, and she insists on being told everything they already know that they're willing to tell her, which is most of everything at this point, because why go over old ground? You're either having her come in as a psychic or not, and she's there to bring you new information, not to verify old information, to prove that she's a psychic. So in her case, we give her most of the information up front. Sometimes we'll walk in and I will hold a few facts back or ask the family to hold something back specifically, or I don't even know the specifics. We just did a case at a place south of San Francisco a couple days ago where I did not know whether the ghost, other than the fact the ghost was female, where she normally appeared in the place and what she looked like. And Annette walked in, went to the ladies' room because we had driven an hour to get there, and comes out and says, okay, there's a woman's ghost here, and she starts describing it, the woman, and the couple just says, that's her? That's who we're seeing. So you can hold things back sometimes for some psychics, and I work with other psychics who don't want to know a thing. They just simply want to be kept totally in the dark. And I will tell you one other thing that I started doing fairly recently. I started bringing in people from my past cases. So, for example, if you had a ghost in your house, and by the time we got done with the investigation, you were okay about that ghost, whether we got rid of the ghost or not, I might ask you, because you've already had several experiences with this one ghost, to come on my next case with me to see if you are sensitive to another ghost. So we're actually using witnesses from one case and bringing them into a next.
Okay.
Which is, it's actually worked out pretty well. You start having multiple witness situations, and they're not professional psychics, so you can feel a little bit better about them being honest about what they're getting.
Well, I've got a question here, and I don't want to surprise either one of you too much with this, but I'd like some input from you, Mr. Auerbach. I'm a big fan of the Ghost Hunter show. I like it. It's a great entertaining show. I don't always know that I believe everything I see on the show, and that's, again, no offense to you, Steve. But again, it's one of those, I want to see these things for myself and be able to experience them for myself before I can really, believe in the paranormal. And I think that's good to have that healthy skepticism when you're involved in this. But I know that you have hesitations because of the shows like Ghost Hunters, Most Haunted, things like that. And I know that Steve, of course, being a professional and wants to learn more, after having seen it, probably at least one or two of the episodes, what would you recommend for TAPS, and now Steve being in charge of the technical aspect of the show, with all the technical pieces that you were just saying aren't always that reliable, what would you like to see that they could promote on the show to make the investigation more solid for you? I mean, understanding, of course, as we've discussed in the past, that there's just some stupid stuff they're going to do on TV that just looks cool.
I get stuck with that too sometimes, yeah.
Now, I know you had mentioned to me, and I thought this was interesting, because, Steve, this question comes up to you guys all the time. Why do you turn off the lights?
Right.
And why do you use the night vision? And the other day, when I spoke to Loyd on the phone, he was telling me about night vision. He didn't believe that was a very effective tool, and that you shouldn't need to turn off the lights to do an investigation. Can you give us a little background on why you feel that way, Mr. Auerbach, and
Sure.
And tell us about that stuff?
There's a couple reasons. First of all, it's not necessary. It's very rare for people to have situations, unless you specifically look out for cases where things are moved around when people are asleep or at night. It's very rare for things to happen only in the dark. We find that the majority of cases with people across the boards for the last 150 years have been people, with one exception, people who have seen ghosts, seen things moving around, experienced things, usually in the daytime, anywhere from early morning to late at night. Now, the one exception actually happens to be people who have singular experiences with friends and relatives who have just died, who have come more or less, if you want to say goodbye, and they tend to show up and sometimes wake people up in the middle of the night. But the majority of phenomena tends to occur at various times, very often during the day. In fact, many of the very successful TV segments that I've done at places out here on the West Coast have been done at 11 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we've had things actually happening. Night vision is cool to look at. There's no question about that, but I have to groan every time I see it, unless the situation, the specific case is that when people turn off the lights, that's when they hear the noises, that's when things are experienced. Then it would make sense to use night vision, but only in those cases. And you need the witnesses to give the background on why it's even necessary. I think that the piece that I see missing from many, many shows is there's not enough focus on the ghost story, on the people's experiences themselves, getting as many witnesses as possible to talk.
Well, now, Steve, do you find, though, doing the show, probably the reason you guys do more of the night vision and the night stuff is because they see the TAPS van pull up in front of your house, and you've got 200 fans out in front hooting and hollering, which could screw up your EVPs or your recordings.
Yeah.
You do it more at night because then it's settled down, it's quieter.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think that anything happens more at night or during the day. I found even before the show that the only time I could get my team, or even more so the clients or homeowners, to really relax and get into the groove and really pay attention to their surroundings was to get all the lights off. And that's really why I mostly did it even before the show. I mean, the show, you kind of got to do it. Let's face it, a show about ghost hunting is going to be very exciting with all the lights on. But, I don't think that stuff happens more so at night. I don't really believe that rule that, 3 a.m. is the psychic hour where stuff mostly happens.
Yeah, I don't know with that either.
As far as night vision, I think if stuff's going to happen, like objects moving and all the lights are off, how are you going to see it unless you have some kind of night vision technology? And that's really the reason why I use it. I don't think that you get better or more results through or with night vision, but, you need to see in the dark. And there's really only 2 episodes in all of our 23 that we've filmed so far where we've used night vision goggles, and that was in season 1, and that was mostly just so we could see in the basement of the Mishler Theater.
All right.
So that's really the take on that.
And what about your other thoughts on the equipment and the things that they show on the show? And the reason we're bringing this up, and again, this isn't an attack on either side, it's more to help the people out there watching the show and the skeptics and the people that are deep into it to realize that they don't have to go out and lay out $1 trillion in equipment in order to be able to become a paranormal investigator.
Yeah, they really don't.
No, you don't. You need your brain, a camera, and a compass is really a flashlight. Maybe all you need,
to be
honest.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, again, the equipment is not designed to pick up ghosts. It's designed to pick up environmental differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as one of the very first people to use a tri-field meter, according to both the company that built it and the guy who sold it to me back in the late 80s, it was just an attempt to find, they were readily available back then, they were becoming cheaper, and it was an attempt to try to play with different types of environmental sensors, because what we're looking for is not only how, for example, a ghost may affect the environment, but how the environment may affect people. And there's been a lot of research over the last 30 years that shows that environmental changes, magnetic, sound, and all sorts of other things, can actually cause people to have experiences which are not paranormal. For example, low-frequency sound waves can cause people to see things out of the corner of their eye, or to have uneasy feelings. And high magnetic fields can cause people to hallucinate. And then in the dark, the problem with the dark, and this comes from my psychic entertainer and magician background, is in the dark you can make people experience all sorts of things with a very, very minor suggestion. And unfortunately, I mean, in that case, if you're going to be in the dark, you need night vision, because you've got to be careful of what everybody else is doing. Like, are the people in the house causing each other to have these experiences? And are they faking it? And you'd absolutely need night vision in a dark situation for that very reason, because there are too many ways to suggest things to people. But there's too much emphasis put on, I get a reading, there must be a ghost here, when there's no specific reading that would indicate a ghost, because that reading also can relate to something else in the environment. It has nothing to do with anything paranormal.
Now, with the electromagnetic fields, too, you were mentioning that those can cause hallucinations. Now, I've heard on the other side of the coin that, you know, who is a scientist? I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, that's been testing that theory, where he puts
Michael Persinger.
Right, and the magnetic deals on each side of the brain, and it'll vibrate it, and then people can see all kinds of stuff. What are your thoughts that, you know, maybe it's not that they're hallucinating, but that it's opening up the portal, or you know, opening up the mind, that you're actually seeing what's there that your eyes normally wouldn't allow you to see?
There's something to that, I think. I think you're hitting on something else. You know, we make a distinction in parapsychology between what we would consider a consciousness or a ghost, somebody who's stuck around after death, and the more common experience of place memory or hauntings, where the environment seems to hold information from its past. You know, a murder is committed, and people see the murder over and over again being committed again and again. It's the people being sensitive to the imprint, the residue, more than anything else. And in those cases, the magnetic fields might very well either super energize the imprint so that people can experience it, or may allow people to open up and be able to experience that. The difference between what Persinger does in the lab and, let's say, a high magnetic field in a haunted place is that in the lab, the experience is more personal and is not linked to history of the building or the room that he's even doing the lab work in. Whereas in the field, that imprint is often connected directly to history, and it can be experienced by many people over decades. So it's as if you're dealing with one is a recording, the other is triggering the imagination in some respects, but they can both be triggered by the same thing.
Well, let me ask you this real quickly. We've got about 5 minutes left on the show, gentlemen, and you know, you've brought up a great point with residual haunting. I'm curious, with all the things that we hear in our homes, you know, you have a fight with your spouse, you have a fight with the kids fight with each other, there's all this energy in the house and imprinting and things that are going on. How often do you think we're haunting ourselves?
A lot.
That we're hearing the thumps and the bangs and the groans and the moans are just from the fight that we had two years ago, you know, in the house replaying itself.
Yeah, we're doing it a lot, unfortunately. You know, the funniest thing is that people will talk about some of the haunts where they're hearing pots and pans rattling, or the dishwasher going on when it's not actually on. The scariest experience I've heard from people has been where they've seen a figure walking down the hall or walking into a room, and they suddenly realize the figure is them.
Right.
So they've seen themselves. They've seen an imprint of themselves doing that. And then you can walk into a person's house and get a good or a bad feeling. There's an emotional imprint that we often leave behind, or leave, for ourselves and for everybody else. So there's a lot to this.
And I know, I think it's feng shui. They say if you clap your hands in the room loudly, in certain points, it'll actually sound dampened. And in other points, it's a sharp, loud clap, and you could be just a foot away from where you were, and that could be where the imprint is. And you can actually clear a room by doing the clapping noise. I know they talk about smudging, things like that. Will that clear out that kind of energy as well, do you believe?
It can, but it needs an intention behind it. Smudging won't really have any help unless there's an intention behind it. The person who's doing it. We've used magnets can actually do that. Strangely enough, you get a high magnetic field registering in a bit of place memory where the folks are experiencing something, playing around with magnetic fields like a bulk tape eraser, a degausser, or just putting magnets down seems to do something, which according to my friends and who are physicists in this area say shouldn't happen, and yet the readings change. So there's something else going on that probably is more on the psychic intention level.
So as we're wrapping up the show here, we have about 2 minutes left in the show. You would hope that with all the shows that are out there, I know that they're entertaining, they're fun. I can see your point that sometimes they're doing more damage than good, because now every chucklehead that has an interest in the paranormal and has watched an episode of Ghost Hunters and has gone out into the cemetery to collect EVPs thinks that they're a professional parapsychologist. Your intention is, or your hope is, that if people want to get into this field, to take it more seriously. It doesn't mean start tomorrow just because you have an interest in this. You should read the books. You should check out the websites like mindreader.com, Loyd Auerbach's website. Check those things out and educate yourself and get a feel for how to deal with people, get a feel with how to deal with situations, making sure that when you put together a group that you've got the dynamic in there, that you can have your Jasons, your Grants, but then you've got a guy like Keith who can be real empathetic and sympathetic and help people through the rough part of it, so that you've got all of those facets filled before you just hit the road and you're a paranormal group because you like ghost hunters.
Well, I think that's right, and you need to be aware of the research that's going on. Be aware of the Parapsychological Association and the Parapsychology Foundation, the educational organizations that are out there that do provide free information to so many people who ask for it. And the other thing I'd like to see happen with the amateur ghost hunter groups, I'd like to see them stop being so territorial and backstabbing. One of the other complaints we're getting from people these days is they've talked to 2 or 3 ghost hunters in their area because they need help, and the next thing they know, they're being yelled at by all of them for calling the others. There's a lot of, I don't know if you've seen that, Steve, but there's a lot of territoriality, people who are calling each other names. It's the most childish thing I've ever seen, and it really causes a problem for parapsychology. We have to, in fact, we're sitting back and kind of laughing at this when people call to complain. It's the difference between having a professional attitude and being a true amateur.
So it's using common sense. Don't fight over these things. You're all in it to win it anyway. You all want to investigate. It's all because you have that interest. You should work together.
Right.
Instead of banging heads on all this stuff.
The field of parapsychology would love to have all the people out there start really doing decent investigations and getting the data in one place through the field, so we could actually share it with everybody and try to figure out what's actually going on. That's what would be great to happen. Well,
I think Tim and I will start working on a parapsychology Hands Across America, where we can get everybody together on this.
Wouldn't that be
not a bad idea?
Exactly.
I should mention the Rhine Research Center in North Carolina is sponsoring a major conference on after death, life after death, which will include a lot of these issues, and that's going to happen May 5th and 6th at Duke University, in fact.
Great. Well, gentlemen, I thank you both for being a part of the show. It went by really fast this evening, and Mr. Auerbach, we'd love to have you again back in the future with us.
Sure.
I just can't thank you enough, and I want to also thank Steve, our special co-host for the evening, to be on here with us. I know that he was very interested in having your words and hearing from you. Just thank you both for joining us this evening and make it a special evening for us. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Our guest next week is Chris Fleming, the co-host of Biography Channel's Dead Famous. He'll be here to join us and discuss the show, which is a reality and documentary type program where he and his co-presenter Gail Porter investigate ghostly phenomena surrounding famous celebrities and historical haunted sites. This is a fantastic show. It's a great opportunity to hear him and talk to him. He'll be taking your questions and emails. If there's anything you need, give us a call. Check out our website. And remember, for Loyd Auerbach, you can reach him at mindreader.com.